Hello, and welcome to ESG with Liliana Locke. I'm your host, Liliana. Let me start today's conversation with a distinction that really matters if you are managing ESG risk. Many organizations believe that they are progressing on ESG because the amount of activity around ESG is increasing. You have more initiatives, there's more reporting happening, there's more requests being answered. But from a risk perspective, activity is not maturity, and maturity is what matters. Today, I want to talk about what ESG risk maturity means in practice and how mature organizations behave differently when ESG risk is treated. Before we get into it, just a quick introduction. I'm Liliana Locke. I help leaders in financial institutions understand their real ESG risks. I've worked with over 300 businesses worldwide to turn uncertainty into defensible decisions. What I want to focus on in this episode is how defensibility is built, not how narratives are improved. So I want to be precise about language. ESG risk maturity is not a scorecard. It's not a rating. It's not the volume of disclosures produced. From a risk management perspective, maturity describes the extent to which ESG risks are clearly identified, consistently assessed, assigned to accountable owners, monitored through defined controls, and supported by evidence that can be relied on. That framing should sound familiar to anyone working with ISO 31000 or enterprise risk systems. In many organizations, ESG risk evolves separately from enterprise risk management. So ESG risk might sit within sustainability teams or compliance, or ESG risk might sit within operations or procurement. As a result, ESG risks are discussed, but they're not always governed in the same way as financial, operational, or legal risks. And this separation is one of the main reasons why maturity is uneven. At its early stages, ESG risk management typically shows a few consistent characteristics. Risks could be identified in broad terms. Materiality is discussed at a really high level. Ownership is implied, so it's just assumed that the sustainability manager is going to manage ESG risk. It's not explicit. And controls exist, perhaps, but they are informal or they're undocumented. When questions arise, the responses depend heavily on individuals rather than on established processes or databases. From a risk perspective, this creates variability. It totally matters whether that person who's responding knows what they're talking about or has a good memory or has enough on their plate that they don't get confused. Any variability in here is truly exposure to risk. You're not managing it and you're not mitigating risk correctly. As an organization's maturity level improves, ESG risk management starts to align more closely with other established risk disciplines. So, larger organizations with established enterprise risk departments or functions are very familiar with articulating their risks very clearly, defining their assessment criteria, assigning ownership, and those people accept their responsibility. They understand it is probably tied to some sort of key performance indicator or KPI metric. And then their controls are documented and reviewed on a regular basis. Very importantly, decisions start to rely less on explanation and more just on referencing something. So referencing these controls or referencing that data. And that shift is central to the organization's ability to defend their risk position. At higher levels of maturity, ESG risk is integrated into existing risk governance rather than treated as an exception. So it is part of overall enterprise risk governance. That means that ESG risk starts to appear in the organization's central risk registry. They're reviewed on a defined cadence, usually with all the other types of risks. Any changes in risk exposure would be tracked as normal risk would be, and then escalation thresholds or triggers are clear. If the organization or the executive leadership team is challenged on any of these risks, then the organization can explain not just what it's doing, but how it knows how it's doing. So that's what maturity looks like from a risk lens. Here is a practical test that you could apply if you're sitting, if you're in a position where you're managing ESG risk and you're wondering, how mature is our organization? How well are we doing in terms of our ESG risk management? If you get asked a certain question about ESG risk twice, 6 months apart, does your answer remain consistent? Does your approach to getting that answer remain consistent? Or are you looking in your various notebooks or checking your email inbox or, diving into different reports to try and figure out when was the last time I talked about this or examined it? If somebody else has asked that question, does their answer align with your answer? And if documentation is requested, does it already exist? Again, like, are you looking through your email inboxes or are you going to a document on your shared folder, which is, obviously protected by its own privacy controls? The more mature your organization is and the more mature your ESG risk management systems are, the more predictable and consistent your responses are. You know that you are early on your maturity journey if your answers vary, or if somebody is telling you what they did and you're just trying to copy their actions. So for many risk leaders, ESG risk maturity it needs to be about control, and it needs to be about repetition. It's you know you, you can think about your journey along your maturity pathway in the same way that you think about other non-financial risks. And that is why increasingly I see that ESG risk needs to be, or is, a focus of the chief risk officer agenda or the chief finance officer agenda. Before, when not many, but a few years ago, this kind of sat within the sustainability team. And now I'm seeing, from my perspective, I'm seeing that ESG risk is becoming more formalized and sitting under these sorts of non-sustainability specialist functions, risk and finance. So if you want a simple internal check, like your takeaway today, you can ask 4 questions. Number 1, are ESG risks clearly articulated in risk terms? Number 2, are the owners defined and are they accountable? Number 3, are controls documented and operating? And number 4, is all this evidence about this risk maintained, or can it be recreated at any moment? These answers will tell you more than any external rating that you could have possibly gone to secure. I hope this episode was useful. If so, hit the subscribe button. And if you work with somebody responsible for enterprise or non-financial risk decisions, then share this episode with them. In the next episode, we will talk about why ESG risk responsibility so often concentrates on individuals and what this signals about system design or your governance gaps in your organization. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.